There. Recording. Excellent. Well, welcome everyone. I'm really excited to have you all here tonight. And this is our first official school board program for 2020. And it's focused on how culturally responsive is your curriculum. Tonight's program is going to run 75 minutes, which is a little unusual, but we wanted to give folks time to actually do some of the workshopping together because we know everyone's super busy during the day. And we wanted to give you the context in the presentation before you launched into doing your scoring. So we'll do the presentation, then we'll have about 30 minutes for you to read the sample curriculum and score it. We'll come back together for a group discussion, and then towards the very end, I'm going to turn it over to board member Corin Kirk from Binghamton, New York, and she's going to share a little bit about how their district is thinking that they're going to utilize the tool and sort of their work as a district and where this might fit. As many of you know, because school boards members have this role to play when it comes to textbook selection and curriculum selection, in many instances, we spend a lot of time at Local Progress talking about community schools, wraparound services, charter accountability, the impacts of poverty on learning, but we really haven't focused as much on teaching and learning and some of those more specific content details. So this is really one of our first opportunities to do just that. And I think most importantly, through the lens of implicit bias and racial equity. So the materials are in the calendar invite. I also emailed them around earlier, but please message me, text, email, or just shout, chat me and whatever if you need them. And please make sure you're on mute for the beginning portion of the section of the presentation. And I think that it's a Zoom, but it's not a webinar format tonight. So it's much less restrictive in terms of participation because this is going to have a conversation. I wanted to make sure folks who did have to get on the phone would be able to chat. So with that, we're delighted to welcome our two experts from the Metro Center NYU who are going to lead tonight's program. Megan Hester has worked in the education justice movement for 2 decades as an organizer, trainer, and researcher. She directs the Education Justice Research and Organizing Collaborative, otherwise known as EJROC, or EJROC, which provides research, policy, data, and strategic support to parent and youth organizing groups across the country. And Pamela D'Andrea Martinez is a PhD student of teaching and learning with a focus on urban education and is an adjunct professor at NYU Steinhardt. Her scholarship focuses on how students can be culturally and linguistically pluralistic, how schools, not students, can be culturally and linguistically pluralistic settings of education for liberation. At the NYU Metro Center, Pamela has studied culturally responsive education, school and district level anti-racist efforts, and student and community activism. And we're thrilled to be partnering with them tonight on this program. So Megan and Pamela, I'm gonna turn it over to you.
Yay, that's awesome. So we're gonna put on, share our screen with a PowerPoint here. Let us know when you can see it.
Will do.
Let's see.
All right, it's up.
Get a thumbs up from some of you if you can see it. Yes.
Great.
Technology.
I move it. Oh, there we go. All right.
Yay. Okay. I mean, you just heard a little bit about EJROC, so
it's all right.
It's all good. It's all good.
Okay.
I'm Pamela, everybody. I don't know if you can see me and see the PowerPoint. It's all good. We'll make it work. Okay, you can see both of us. All right. Do you want to intro this picture?
Sure. So this is just a picture from a rally the parents had a couple of years ago, fighting for more culturally responsive curriculum and practices in New York City school districts. We always like this just because it kind of captures what we're about.
And so we're part of EJROC. EJROC puts together, as you heard in Megan's bio, puts together research and organizing and provides strategic support in that way to organizing groups as they campaign. So we're gonna start with, rather than jump into a definition of culturally responsive education, I think it's good to hear what it means to people. And so we're going to play a short excerpt of this video that was made by CEJ, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So this is, well, it's a sort of a 2-minute excerpt from a larger video, but we wanted to just give you a taste of it. Oops, hello. Okay. Can you guys hear it?
Culturally responsive education for me is the understanding that children are people, and without building relationships and without understanding children, we can't teach them.
Welcoming families in, having teachers and staff come out of the school building to really learn about the communities that they're in.
I want everyone to be able to know, along with myself, about my heritage.
When we say decolonizing our practice and decolonizing education, it is first questioning what you think is normal and right.
We got the response from teachers that they didn't feel comfortable teaching about LGBTQ history because they didn't identify, or we got the response that they're against teaching LGBTQ history within schools.
A lot of the literature that we read talked about topics and experiences that were not that relevant to me.
When we negate people the opportunity to learn their legacy and what brought them into this world, we don't give them the space to fully love themselves.
Yo he vivido en carne propia, yo he visto y escuchado cómo los maestros hablan de los niños. Cada día dice, llegan los niños y no traen un lápiz. Y muchos niños llegan con hambre, muchos niños llegan con problemas en el hogar. Y yo no tengo tiempo para estar tratando con esos niños.
My parents stopped going to parent-teacher meetings in middle school. A lot of the teachers just went with that, right? That they didn't think, okay, well, this 12-year-old is filling out all these forms and also just signing her parents' name. There was no effort to make them a part of this world.
It's about like SATs, ACTs, getting these high grades, and they don't develop their individualities like that carbon copy, but you're forgetting that you're human. Like, find that thing about you that makes you different from everyone else.
That's cultural responsiveness. It's challenging the adults in the building to do right by every child and therefore doing right by themselves.
I think the beauty of that video is that it gets right at the anti-racist and equity mission of culturally responsive education, whereas sometimes we might get bogged down by the word culture. There's so much more to unpack when it comes to culturally responsive education. I love this definition because it gets at, today we're going to talk about curriculum, but it gets at all the aspects of education and how they are together culturally responsive. Culturally responsive education refers to the combination of teaching, pedagogy, curriculum, attitudes, and practices that center students' cultures, identities, and context throughout educational systems. And the process of centering the many cultures in a room, but the many cultures that make our history, that process is also requires some decentering, and it requires a social justice mission along with it. So that's the other piece that we wanted to get across. This is our vision. Well, actually, this is the NYSED, so the New York State Education Department's mission, but it's borrowed largely from Gloria Ladson-Billings' work around culturally responsive education and her research. But this is the type of student that we envision is taking part in this type of education. So this student is experiencing academic success. This student is socioculturally aware of themselves and of the people around them. And then this student is challenging inequities as they see them, and thinking about access and power and privilege. And so it stands that all aspects of the education system also are aligning with this vision that we want for students. And so there is some research around, as we focus on curriculum, there's some research around some of the benefits of culturally responsive curricula, and here they are listed. So student academic engagement is increased, attendance, grade point averages, graduation rates, civic engagement, positive racial images, self-definition. These are not small things, but they're just super important to know that there are some outcomes that we already know are associated with this. So given some of the curricula that some of you sent in for us to compare with the demographics of your location. So this is an example from Lovington, New Mexico. If you look on the left, that first set of bars, that is the racial composition of Lovington.
Or the school district.
Of the school district, so the student composition. And so if you're looking at the different curricula, so we've got Engage, New York, the authors that are represented in the curriculum, and also the characters. And then again for Pearson, authors and characters, and then for Scholastic authors and characters, you see that the distribution looks quite different. So our young people in Lovington are not being represented by their curricula. Here's Durham, and then Culver City, California. So, I mean, this is something we could share with you all. So yeah, I'm getting a yes from Culver. Yeah, Culver City. But it gives you a sense of why it's so important, just on a representation basis, because we're going to talk about lots of different aspects of curriculum, but representation is one of them.
So that's sort of like a super quick just overview of culturally responsive education. And you know, again, we can send you lots and lots of data on lots of different curriculum. We actually did a study of 15 different commonly used ELA, English Language Arts curriculum across the country, and did the breakdown of demographic breakdown of authors and characters, so we can share all of that with you. But what we wanted to do is move right into this scorecard, because this is a tool that a lot of schools and districts have used to sort of get a read on how is their curriculum doing on different measures that curriculum is not usually evaluated on. So you guys have the curriculum scorecard, right? It's linked in the invite. Is that right, Parsi?
Yes, I sent it out this afternoon, but for those of you, you all should have gotten a calendar invite, and it's in the body of the calendar invite, it's a new abbreviated scorecard for tonight, because this one is, the official PDF is 20 pages long. So Megan and Pamela created something a little more manageable. If you don't have it, please just let me know and I'll make sure you get it.
Yeah. So yeah, you can look at the full scorecard. We're going to be using that short one tonight. But basically, the scorecard was a tool that we created because parents were asking, how do I know whether my child's curriculum is racist? How my child's curriculum does on issues of gender or sexual identity. And so we sort of put together a lot of stuff that was out there and came up with this tool. And just to say, it's not meant to be an objective tool. It really is asking, what is your judgment? What is your opinion of this curriculum? And so when it's done in a sort of, inclusive process in which you have lots of stakeholders at the table making this decision together, it can be a really powerful way to examine the curriculum. So, sorry, I gotta move the slides here.
Can I say something real quick for Lovington?
Sure.
I appreciate it. This call has been really influential because based on what we learned just in the little bit of surveying that we did from what Tarsi sent, we created an equity council of which we ensured that 50% of the people in the equity council represent our minority and our subculture and our subsets, including special education as well as Native American and Hispanic, because we became aware that our curriculum was bereft of representing that. So we actually created an equity council at our last board meeting to advise the board and the superintendent on curriculum. So we're excited to be on this call tonight.
Great. Thank you.
Welcome, Greg.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through. So hopefully you guys have the scorecard in front of you, and you can take a look. So the scorecard is basically has sort of an introductory section, and then it's divided into 3 sections. There's a representation section, a social justice section, and a teacher's materials. I'm going to walk you really quickly through this with the idea that it might be something you want to do in your district, so want you to have a sense of the whole thing. The first section is just a straight demographic representation, which is what I showed you in those charts. And that says who's represented, but it doesn't say how they're represented. And so this next representation section, which is on page 10 of the full scorecard document, asks questions like, are diverse family structures represented? Are characters of a color main characters? Are they just sidekicks? If there's conflict in the story, is it usually attributed to a character of color? So really looking at the quality and the nature of the representation. And then this is the sort of the tally, which just looks at the authors and the characters, the identities that are and are not represented. Then the next section after that is the social justice section. And so this really looks at that critical consciousness part of culturally responsive education that Pamela mentioned. So this looks at, how is the curriculum looking at questions of social justice, of privilege, of power in society? So, are there microaggressions that are communicated through the curriculum? Are diverse populations portrayed for their assets and strengths, or are they portrayed for their, their deficits and struggles? So one thing we often see is that curriculum sometimes, if where characters of color are, represented, often it's famine, it's war, poverty, hardship, right? So looking at, what does that communicate to students about the difference between, different populations? So that's what sort of the social justice section gets at. And then there's a teacher's materials section, which looks at how are the teacher's materials instructing students to approach this material. So first of all, were the teacher's materials created by a diverse group of folks as well? Are teachers encouraged to think about their own identity in relation to the identities of their students? Are they encouraged to take an asset, based approach to their students rather than a deficit-based approach? Are they asked to make and sort of encourage, the curriculum obviously is not going to tell you exactly how it connects to your local school community. Are teachers prompted to make connections to their local school community, to make connections to the neighborhood? Are there places pointed out where those kinds of connections with students' lives could be highlighted? And I give an example, like often we see curriculum where the only mention of diversity is around English language learners, and the only way that English language are approached are as students who have the deficit of not speaking English. But the fact that, where they're sort of, teachers are guided to see English language learners as a challenge rather than as an asset who bring this, all this linguistic and cultural knowledge that other students in the class don't have. So it's just sort of like one common example of where a teacher's materials can either take or miss an opportunity to guide teachers for bringing out the experiences and the assets of their students. And so the way that the scorecard works is, if you have it in front of you, if you turn to actually don't turn there yet. So for each of these pages 10, 11, and 12 in the scorecard, people score individually, and they say for that, what's your opinion? Are you very satisfied with how the curriculum does? Are you somewhat satisfied? Is it just unclear? You're not sure where it is? And we gave that a negative charge because we felt like really these things should be clear in curriculum. It should be clear whether or not, sort of principles of social justice are being communicated or whether teachers are being guided to make connections with the students' identities. If it's unclear, that's a problem. Or not satisfied. And so you sort of just put the number for what you think for each of these boxes. Everybody scores individually. There's no peer pressure. People can have very different opinions. That's fine. Then you kind of average it up if you're with a team. And so the idea is for us as a group, how is our perception of this curriculum? We may have different ideas. We may have experienced the curriculum differently. When we put all our scores together, what is our average? And then there's sort of a rubric in the scorecard, which starts on page 14, where you take your average score for your group and then you put it on this spectrum from culturally destructive to culturally responsive. See where does your curriculum fall, and it gives a little description of it, and then that can sort of lead to a discussion of, does that seem right to us? Does that seem like a fair assessment? If not, where on the scale do we think we fall? But again, sort of each of these are points for really rich discussion with the group of their perceptions of the curriculum and sort of what that means about its impact on students. So actually, we're not going to do that one now. So this is just sort of an overview of how the curriculum works. And we want to give you guys a chance to try it out. And so what we're going to do is, and it's sort of is a very mini version, like usually when we do these workshops with teachers or, who have parents, other folks, we have like 2.5 to 3 hours to really dive into a sample of the curriculum. We read like a unit of curriculum together and then use the scorecard to evaluate it. But what we're doing tonight is just giving you a very short unit to scan and then to sort of try out the scoring process, knowing that this is not at all going to be complete tonight, but it gives you a taste of how this works so you can have an idea of whether it's something you could do in your district. Any questions before we move on? And then I'll sort of instruct you on the next part. Nope. All right. Can't tell if somebody was going to come off mute.
I have a question. The Equity Council will be made up of 15 members. It looks to me like we need to plan at least 6 hours to adequately do the complete review. Is that about right from just looking at it, or what is your suggestion?
I mean, it could be, I don't know if you want to do this for 6 hours straight, but if you have those 6 hours, you could dig into a serious amount of curriculum. I think it's even helpful just to start with a couple of hours and look at, like one grade level or one, I don't know. What is your sense from doing this?
Yeah. And I think also just say, we would be happy to follow up with you afterwards to sort of think through what might be the right way to do it. I think you could do samples. We've done it several ways. We've sometimes done samples from several grades, or if there are different curriculum that are being used in different schools, sometimes we divide into groups and have different teams look at different curriculum. You could also have, because doing all 3 pages of the scorecard can be a lot, you could have different groups do different pages of it. So would be happy to, connect with you on the best way to do it. I think it just depends on the group and the setup.
Mm-hmm.
There's lots of ways to do it, though.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes. And yeah, I agree, Tarsi, sorry, what you said in the chat. If you're doing this with a group, it's best for everybody to really have a paper copy of the scorecard. I think it's most accessible. So any other questions before we move into the actual exercise? Okay, let's do this. All right. So here's what we've done. We have taken a unit from 5th grade English language arts curriculum from Expeditionary Learning, which is also the same as Engage New York, which somebody had said they were using. And we've just taken an excerpt. So the way we usually do this is like we tried to excerpt something for which the reading won't take you too long, because otherwise we'd be sitting here reading a novel for the next hour and a half before we get to scoring. So this is a unit on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So as everybody have, you should just pull up the PDF that Tarsi sent of this document. It should look like this on the front page. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take just 20 minutes for everybody to just read. And what I would recommend is that you scan the first, 5 or 6 pages are the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And if you start reading it, you're going to get the idea of it. You don't have to read every single article to get an idea of the text. And then that you skim over, look at some of the lessons more in depth, the other ones more lightly, sort of skim over the lessons that this curriculum has about that Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And then, fortunately, they're not sequentially paginated because it's again an excerpt from a larger thing. But if you turn towards the end, I think probably on the PDF around page 50, is something that's another text that says Teaching Nepalis to Read, Plant, and Vote. And I recommend that you read that one. And then there's a couple pages later, there is also a short excerpt called From Kosovo to the United States. And so we'll sort of prompt you halfway through to make sure that you get to those texts as well. And just, I think whatever you read from the lessons is going to be helpful. So just, skim as much as you can in the next 20 minutes. And then we're going to give you a couple minutes to score what you think is possible to score given what you were able to read on that abbreviated scorecard page. And then we'll come back and discuss. Does that sound right, Tarsi? Yes. All right.
I just set a timer for 20 minutes. So in 10 minutes, I'll sort of give everyone a 10-minute reading check if that works, or you can do it.
Sounds great.
I'm going to pause the recording until we come back for discussion.
Okay, excellent. To go through at least part of the one-page scorecard and put down your impressions of it. If this was a real scoring, what we would then do is go to the sort of the rubric on page 14, and we would see where it falls from culturally destructive to culturally responsive. Because we put together this composite scorecard, it doesn't work that we're not going to do that. But we wanted to just get a sense of, what did you think? How did you score this curriculum? What did you notice sort of looking at these questions, these scorecard questions in relation to what you read?
It's not pretty. I mean, especially walking through those specific questions, there were very few that I could give positive scores to. Actually, I didn't give any, but I didn't pay attention to the teacher guided questions. I only marked based on the text.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't say for sure that I wouldn't have given positive there, but just reading mostly the Kosovo story and the other story before that, yeah, it's like super America-centric exceptionalism, uncomfortable. So, but these specific questions are helpful to like really parse out what exactly is the problem. Because, you know, being educated in that system, we're super indoctrinated. Like that's exactly the kind of material I read. Right. So it's interesting to be forced to look at it and see how problematic it is.
Yeah, can you be specific? Like what did you notice that was problematic?
Sure. I mean, without walking through the rubric, just reading on my own, but based on the preamble conversation we had, your presentation, the rescue thing, like having to be rescued, especially in Kosovo. I mean, at least in the first story, you know, they were helping themselves, but the whole idea of that there was nothing positive about them at all represented. There was no story of richness at all. And the only story therein was they were an illiterate people and then they were saved. So it's disturbing. In particular, the Kosovo one was disturbing because of the place that Christianity played in the United States. And
yeah. Other thoughts? Yeah, and yeah, other thoughts on the text and the lessons?
I mean, Kelly, I'll just say that I, you know, your reflection about like, that's how we learned and like sort of the indoctrination that passes on from generation to generation. It's sort of like challenging it or having the tools to challenge something and analyze it from a different perspective is like one of the big cycles to break. And I think, you know, we talk about, you know, how teachers don't look like the students they're teaching, or like you have a lot of, and that it's all embodied in that. And so I feel like that's like one of the first steps to realizing is that like, just because it's the way we've done it doesn't mean it's obviously the right way. And like we those experiences into the world and the work.
Yeah.
But yeah, as Megan said, I'm curious, you know, as others on the call are thinking about, you know, sort of the tool and thinking about your own curriculum and sort of reflecting on the experience of looking at this through this particular lens, were there things that jumped out or sort of reflections that you have on the text?
I'll say I think it's interesting, you know, what you were saying about the Nepali and the Kosovo ones, that some of that attitude is also reflected in the lesson. So I know people have pointed out to us before, for example, that it refers to the Nepali names as hard names, you know, like, you know, says something about, you know, that, you know, you may need to help the students with hard names, which is just interesting, you know, hard for who, and might there be students in your classroom who have hard names? And, you know, the way that could come to students, or could, you know, the way the student might perceive that. And I think also just interesting that, you know, people have pointed out in other scorings that there is sort of an assumption that human rights violations happen elsewhere.
Yeah, totally.
That this is an international problem. So it says a couple times, you know, like, ask students to think about how are human rights not being met in other places in the world. but there's not really a connection, you know, necessarily back to their own lives and how human rights might not be being met here.
And I imagine students right now would organically ask questions about our own environments because they're surrounded by the homelessness crisis in our major metropolitan areas.
Mm-hmm.
So immediately, even a third grade student, even a second grade or first grade student would say, wait a second, if we're guaranteed, you know, according to the human rights, we're guaranteed a roof, safety, da 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 da. We see lots of people who don't have that guarantee right here. They would just ask that question. How would the teacher respond? They'd have to respond off the cuff.
Mm-hmm.
They have no guidance about how to respond.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. Yep.
So one thing that I think is problematic with stuff like this is it's always like the perspective is of somebody from somewhere else, and so they're just an immigrant, right? And so it's not like people live here as well and they have something to add to the culture. It's like they're an immigrant coming to our place, our country. And it's unfortunate that the only like diversity that is provided through curriculum or like literature is that of the experience of, you know, like exception. So somebody who migrated here or somebody who's really good in sports or like a historical figure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's a lot of opportunities in the curriculum, and I think people point out is like this. I mean, one of the reasons we you know, this is a nice lesson to score often is there are so many natural connections to students' lives. That when you think about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights to students' lives, whether you have a class of immigrant students or a class of students whose families have been here for a long time, there's so many connections with students' lives, but that largely the curriculum doesn't make those connections and doesn't help teachers to make those. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Shonda, for your comment. I'm glad that I think that, and it's 8 o'clock, so we do have a little bit of flexibility here, but, I wanted to just sort of, we did a presentation, a session on this, not specifically just the scorecard, but a little bit more broad of a session at our New York State local progress convening in November, and Corin was there. And sort of, this was one of the introductions I think that you had to the tool. And so I just wanted to give you a second to share a little bit about what's happening in Binghamton and sort of like where you're thinking this tool could fit into your work. And then we'll sort of transition into the closing, which is really just an encouragement for folks to share with their districts, and also kind of just an open question to, how can we support you in this work? But Corinne, if you want to take a minute, I'd love to hear a little bit from you.
Yeah, absolutely. So good evening, everyone. So as Parsi said, it was at the convening that I learned about this tool. And so I thought, how can I bring this back to my district and how can we use this? So my district had an incident that happened last year, and because of that, we knew that we needed an equity committee. And so our equity committee actually just started in September. And originally I thought, well, I can just take this tool and we can use that. But in attending our last couple of sessions, and we actually only meet every other month. And so I kind of want to speak to the gentleman who spoke up a little bit earlier about, oh, this is perfect and I'm going to take it to my committee. I would caution taking it too soon. In our last session, the first session was kind of about, okay, well, why do we need equity, diversity, and inclusion? Why do we need to be thinking about this as a school district? And then at our last meeting, we were kind of defining equity. So I would caution you from trying to go in too soon and using this tool when you don't have people who have the same definition, or they're not coming from the same place, or there's a little re-education that you might want to do in terms of their mindset as to where they are currently. So I just wanted to say that. So there might be some pre-work that needs to be done before people are actually ready to use this tool and score things and then implement new things. So I really love that this is talking about looking at your curriculum as a whole. I really like that it's taking an analysis of, you know, a written curriculum that you can pull. And of course, the school district, being a school board member, a school district can't say, okay, this failed, this was really terrible, and so now we're going to scrap that curriculum and start new. So financially, even though that's something we might want to do, that's not something that's feasible. But I like that this allows for an analysis as to what other supplemental things that we can provide and implement in the curriculum, in students' education, in their experience in the district to improve the cultural responsiveness of the curriculum. And so now what I have proposed that this is a tool that we will use to help us on that path, looking overall at our district and looking at equity. But just, you know, I was really gung-ho about coming back to my district and using this tool. And then I got back and I listened to what folks were saying, and I realized that we're not ready just yet. So I am very excited to use it, and we will be using it. It's just getting people up to speed so that they can use it in a way that is going to garner some solutions to make positive changes for our students. So yeah, and I also, on a side note, knowing that this is missing from curriculum, and knowing that if you're looking at like elementary level books, that it is more likely for you to have an inanimate object be the main character of your book over a person of color, which is crazy to me. So it's like the toaster can be the main character in your story, but not me as a Black woman. So we know how much representation matters. And so earlier, so in October, I did a fundraiser to, I did a fundraiser to raise money and purchase books. There is a local Black woman who is an author. She has a child who has special needs. So I did a fundraiser to purchase the book where her son is the main character. And again, like I just mentioned, and it's not one of these, you know, exception type situations. He's not a basketball player. He's not, it's not about him migrating here from somewhere else. It's not about being a historical figure from civil rights. It's just, he is a young boy. He's a young boy of color. He's a Black boy, and he's going through life and he's having fun. So same as look at Dick and Jane, okay, we're also gonna look at this little Black boy living life, experiencing fun. So in summation, I think it's a phenomenal tool. I'm very excited to use it. When I got back to my home district and I was hearing some of the things that were being said in this equity committee. So these people are volunteering to come here and do this work. They just didn't realize, and I didn't realize how far they were from being ready to implement it, actually listen to the results without, I mean, I don't know how else to say it, without white fragility, right? Be able to listen to those results and then implement a solution and a change. So thank you, and I will definitely keep the group up to date as to what happens in my district and how folks respond.
Yep.
That's super helpful. Thank you, Corinne. I really appreciate that.
I wanted to just add in, yeah, I think I completely agree. I think that you want to make sure you have a group of folks who already have an appreciation for this approach, right? Before doing the scorecard. Sometimes that demographic representation that we showed, you know, can be a point of entry for people, because sometimes the numbers are so shocking that it then can sort of jumpstart a bit of a conversation around the curriculum. But absolutely, it's important to do it at the right, sort of deploy the scorecard at the right moment, because I think deployed too early, it can also backfire. And I think just one other thing to add to Corinne, what you said was that, you know, once you do have folks who are on board with this approach, who know that they want to be culturally responsive, who use this tool in order to assess where you're at currently, it can also be used, and it has been used by many schools, to sort of think about, how do we adapt the curriculum we have? Like you're saying, we're not buying a new curriculum for 5 years. So how do we use this in order to guide how we want to redo some of our lessons, how we want to, look at our professional development so that we can teach this curriculum in a more culturally responsive way.
Yeah, and I actually got a text which sort of goes on to the curriculum purchasing, which is from somebody on the call that's saying like one big concern is being able only to choose the vendors approved by the public education department to have access to the funding formula for the curriculum. And then if they go outside those vendors, then they have to use operational dollars. So I don't know how widespread that is, but it is something like, I think the adaptation piece is really important to think about.
Absolutely.
Based on that. And yes, more chats here from Shonda. I can agree. We have a core equity team, that meets monthly. Timing is, okay, great. So I think we're pretty much up at the end here, but I just wanted to appreciate folks who jumped on, and I'm really excited to share out this recording with folks who couldn't make it and follow up. If there's anything, Corin or Chandra or Keisha, like if there's anything, and Greg, I think had to jump off, but that we can do in this process, in addition to sort of having this, having the scorecard available, which I think you all have, but I'll make sure to resend, and sort of the cautions, and like we can put you in an email thread if you're kind of in the same position. I think Megan and Pamela might be willing to like maybe share some additional thoughts or like help you think about how to structure these parties. It sounds like depending on sort of who and what, there are different ways to do it, and that might be a bigger, I don't know if that's a bigger conversation.
Yeah, maybe just to say briefly, we call the scorecard parties, and we get people together to do this. We've done it just with parents. We've done it with parents and students, teachers, just teachers, district officials, community organizations, community activists. There's lots of different ways to do it. But yeah, if it does seem like it's something that might be right for your district, for your city, feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to talk through what might work, what wouldn't work, if there's a part of it that you want to try, and how to structure that in a way that kind of sets it up to advance the conversation.
Fantastic. Well, if we don't have any other questions or comments, Megan and Pamela, thank you so much for the presentation and sort of the materials for us to, we do have a question. Has this been done with curriculum specialists in various districts?
Yeah, it has been. We've done it here in New York City with some folks, and then we've heard from people in other districts that have used it. We also have heard from people who have used it with teacher preparation programs, like with, in college classes, in community-based organizations, like after-school programs that have their own curriculum. So yes, absolutely. It's been done in like a lot of different settings.
Awesome. Yeah, I think this is, it's one of these, when I learned about the tool last year, I was really excited because it was something, a concrete sort of work idea tool to be able to apply, I think, in many different circumstances, which in education can sometimes be a little complicated to find something. I mean, there are a lot of tools out there, but like this is something that I think a lot of districts share in common. And so, I think the spreading beyond state law, beyond, it's like an opportunity for local progress members who are in different districts in different states across the country to have sort of a shared tool that you could take back or share with your community partner organizations who could do that external, probably with a little less bureaucracy, could do it for their own curriculum. And, I think it's just a like really great available tool. And so I would just encourage folks to think about who, not just in the district, might want to see this. And to Megan's point, I think, the making sure, my understanding, right, and she'll correct me if I'm wrong here, but is, even before you introduce a tool, you make sure the right people are at the table for those scoring parties. And so, making sure it's like the right representation and parents and students and community members. And so I think that's a thoughtful piece of it as well that's really important. And I think, the equity core teams that districts seem to be having many of, based on tonight's comments, I think that's a great place to start, but I would suspect like making sure you have a representative core equity team is also important. So with kind of within that structure of a committee. So this has been really helpful, and thank you everyone for your comments and reflections. That's really helpful as well. I will save this recording and circulate it, and Megan and Pamela, I'll probably be in touch. I might have some folks reaching out for connections. If you're open to it, I might CC you on the follow-up email. But I'm really excited to support and be in touch with people wanting to use this tool. So with that, I think I will bid you all good night or good afternoon if you're on the West Coast, and look forward to being in touch with everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Have a
you.
great